Good evening, Detroit Lakes. This is the Vikings Territory Breakdown. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and a brand spanking new Minnesota Wild website called MiniIce.com that you can check out tonight or tomorrow. It's launching apparently. I am joined, as always, by my BFF, Mr. Joe Oberle. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I've been battling tech issues all week, and it sounds like I just brought him to this broadcast. We lost Mike, got him back, so here we go.
It might be the fake ACL or tendon in your knee that's
It could be.
thrown off the Wi-Fi. Joe owns a website called joeoberle.com. You can go there and read his takes on life and the Vikings. He's also written a couple amazing books that you should check out that I'll actually list in the description of this show. We are also joined, as always, by Coach Mike Tice, who is in Canton this week. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing pretty well, guys. How you guys doing? Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
That was great.
Yeah, it
Still,
was.
Yeah.
I'm still. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I'm still eating leftovers, which I think they have fermented
Yeah,
fermented at this point.
that's kind of
I had to finally throw out the rest of the stuffing before I took off for Canton.
you
But
know when you introduce somebody as saying that they're in Canton, that's got brings a lot of weight to a statement. Mike Tice is in Canton, so what are you doing there, Mike?
well, certainly we know I'm not getting inducted to the Hall of Fame. We know that for sure. But I'm here working on a program with former Vikings running back coach Dean Dalton, and it's called the NFL Alumni Academy in conjunction with the Hall of Fame and the NFL Alumni Association. And what we're doing is we're training offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and running backs to be the next group of players that go to the practice squad when teams need to reestablish the numbers on their practice squad due to injuries.
So are these undrafted free agents then, for the most part?
Yeah, most of them guys are either late draft picks or undrafted free agents like I was, and we have try to keep them in shape. We try to get them better. We've got a great coaching staff here that works with the players, and we've had 17 players go through to teams in the league for workouts, and we've had 13, I believe the number's 13 players sign with teams around the league, including a young player this week with the Jaguars.
That's
Wow.
all this year. Those numbers
all this year. We started the third week of the season back in September, and the program ends on December 23rd. Yeah.
It kind of sounds like
amazing.
Yeah, the NFL is strange because they don't really have a developmental league like all the other pro sports do. I mean, they had NFL Europe for a while, and then you've had like the AAW or XFL come and go in 2 or 3 weeks. But it kind of sounds like you're keeping some guys in shape and available for the teams that need it. So that's really actually amazing.
Coach, did you think
Go
you'd
ahead.
get those numbers this year? I mean, obviously COVID, but is that a surprise to you to sign that many people?
Well, we actually thought it would be better, but COVID has really beat us up pretty badly because when the teams bring the players in, they have to sit in a hotel for 7 days and pass the quarantine, and that's been making it a little rough on us. But we're excited with the start. We're looking to build on this and add more positions next year. And we're hoping this is the new way that the NFL will bring players in each week for tryouts, workouts, or even just sign the players.
Wow, that is so cool. We should chat sometime. I'd love to write an article about that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Um,
Great.
Real quick, I want to get your take, both your guys' take on the Jags game, particularly from the narrative of it being an ugly win, and I know the adage is always, well, a win's a win in the NFL, but there's that. There's people saying the Vikings play down to the competition's level. And Coach Tice, as the guy who has a ton of perspective on this, is that really a thing? Do you think where teams might play down to another team's level, or a win being a win as opposed to being kind of a win with conditions?
Well, first of all, the Jaguars staff and players are fighting for their professional careers. They don't want to be out of the league. They don't want to be out of jobs. So you're going to get the best that the Jaguars have to offer. They have a good staff. I know a lot of the guys on the staff, including the head coach. They've been in some, close, tough games this season. And, we're talking about winning ugly, but those winning ugly games are going to be the games that when you come down to the end of it, you're saying, man, thank God we won that game. And if we beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, you think anyone's going to remember the Jaguar game?
No.
I mean, let's be real. Let's be real. And the Vikings have won 5 of 6 since the bye, including the win over the Packers and including the win last week, the ugly win, if you will, over the Jags. They've got 4 to go. They're right in the thick of things. I don't think it really matters. I think dwelling on it with 4 games to go is not what the fans should be doing right now.
Do you think that the players do? Coach Zimmer after the game said the locker room was pretty quiet. So you wonder if the players were thinking the same thing, that we should have beat these guys by more. But, isn't the truth the fact that all these teams are very close in talent, and there's this or that. You're going to get a good game just about every week if that team's up to play for it, no matter who it is, right?
Yeah, Lions beat the Bears, right? Washington football team beat the Steelers.
Yeah.
The Giants beat the Seahawks, but the Vikings pulled out a win, albeit not very pretty, over the Jags, and they're not listed in that group I just gave you.
Yeah, and I think if there's the positive or the other spin you could take is, especially with what people say about Cousins not being clutch and so on and so forth, that they've had a lot of really close games in the last couple of weeks where they've had to come from behind. They've had to show, their character and their grit, and they've shown that they can come back from behind and put these, amazing drives together, so on and so forth. And so when it comes to playoff time, at least they have that experience and they know that they can do it, as opposed to maybe, breezing through some of these games, and then when it gets close against tougher competition, on paper anyway, they might not have that experience to draw from. So I think it's a positive. But you mentioned the Steelers game, which was the upset of the week, perhaps the upset of the season. How with the Vikings especially, going 5-1 in the last 6 games, and they have 4 to go. If they win 3 of those 4, they have like a 90% chance of going to the postseason. They basically control their own destiny. How hard is it for a team to string together streaks like that, Coach? The Steelers, is there that some aspect of the teams know that they're undefeated, so they try harder, almost like playing the previous year Super Bowl champion? Everyone wants to knock them down. Why is it so hard for teams to really go undefeated even, or to put together streaks like that?
Well, there's so many variables. You have injuries, and now you have the COVID variable, and you have teaching by Zoom instead of face-to-face. You have the travel across the country and back. You have teams that have to play on Monday night and then come back and play the next Sunday. And now you have teams playing on Wednesday that had to play on Monday night. And, that's one of the reasons why I picked the Washington football team to be victorious over the Steelers, because
oh my,
they were just playing my podcast, pick of the week, baby.
Wow.
But they were playing 3 games in 12 days, and that's a lot of wear and tear on players. That's a lot of traveling, a lot of stress, a lot of fitting in new game plans in a very short period of time, and momentum's a big thing. And the Washington football team, along with a couple other teams that are not so good. Let's say the Giants. They're playing great defense right now. These teams are going to get better. These teams are going to get better as we get towards this end of the season. So hopefully the Vikings can come out this week against a really good Buccaneers team and put together a great game plan and go out there and execute. Let me say a couple of things about Cousins, who's always taking a big hit. Cousins leads the league in red zone quarterback rating, 92.1, and Aaron Rodgers is 90.7, and Russell Wilson is 90.2. Cousins is the only quarterback in the last 6 years to throw for 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns in each of the last 6 seasons. There's nobody else. I think Aaron Rodgers and a couple guys are close. Maybe Brady, I think, missed it 1 year. Russell Wilson didn't do it 2 times. So, we pick on Cousins, and because of they're not winning on national TV, and other things. But you know what? He's done a really nice job, and he's been consistent for the Vikings, and I think the Vikings fans should appreciate that.
I saw recently a stat today that something about this offense was hearkening back to the days, or it wasn't this good, and it harkens all the way back to I believe one of your first seasons, Mike, as head coach of the Vikings, when the year they beat the Packers in the playoffs in the wild card game, and
2004.
Yes, and so I mean that says quite a bit about what's going on here, and it says quite a bit about the team that you had back then. Be fun to talk about that someday. But yeah, your point about Cousins is well taken. Joe and I have talked about it forever with Cousins and back and forth and this and that, and ultimately you're judged on wins. And, they have won some games here with Kirk Cousins, but it hasn't always been pretty. It hasn't always been perfect. And it hasn't always been what you see across the board from Aaron Rodgers or next week from Tom Brady, blah, blah, blah. So people get caught up in those comparisons. But, you really look at his career here in Minnesota objectively, and it's much better than he gets credit for.
Especially for a team that's
you're right. It's a win. You got to win a playoff game. Yeah,
and he's done that. I feel, I understand where some of this comes from, because there hasn't been, outside of Dante, really, in my lifetime, being born in 1984, at least when I was cognizant of the team, where we've drafted and developed a quarterback. There's that stat where a quarterback hasn't played back-to-back 16-game seasons for the Vikings since 1978. I think Cousins would have done that if they didn't sit him at the end of last season against the Bears. But I've and Joe knows this. I've written so many articles trying to get to the bottom of what people's problem is with Cousins, because he's doing things that we wanted my entire life. I mean, we all, there's been times when they brought Favre in and everyone said, we got this great defense, we have AP, we just need a quarterback to get over the hump. Teddy comes in, everyone loves him, and they in my opinion, preemptively kind of crowned him as an elite quarterback, while he had potential, but he wasn't there yet. It's actually why I started the site in the first place, because I got banned from like every message board for saying that. But I think the main reason people have a problem with Cousins that I can find in every comment that I get on the articles that I write, that always boils down to his contract. And I think that people felt he was incredibly overpaid in 2018. I don't think a lot of them realized that kind of set the market for quarterbacks, and now he's like the 7th or 8th highest paid quarterback. He's only making $21 million this year. Granted, he's going to make $45 million guaranteed, but that's what the market for his services are. And so people, I think, thought he was bad in Washington. We overpaid him, and it was to the detriment of this team, even though, again, he's making $21 million this year, and they still are up against the cap. It's not just him. That's not the reason. So it's a little strange to me. It's this weird cognitive dissonance where it's like, well, the Vikings have one of the most elite and dangerous offenses in the league, and look at Justin Jefferson, harkens back to Randy Moss, and so on and so forth. But they try to remove Cousins from any credit that they're giving. They give it to everyone else. I don't know. Clearly, it bothers me. But the comparisons of Jefferson to Moss, I can't think of a better person to ask about that than you, Coach. As a guy who obviously coached Moss.
I thought you wanted to ask me, Joe.
Yeah, full disclosure, he's my favorite player of all time. So I feel like, he's a very unique skill set and situation. I think, that Jefferson's not there yet, but I understand why people are making those comparisons. I mean, he's been amazing this year. But what do you see in Jefferson's game, either as compared to what you saw from Randy or just on his own, since he's his own player and deserves his own credit?
Well, you've got he's tied a record. He set 1,000 yards in 12 games. Only 4 guys have done that. Randy Moss, Bolden, kid from Florida State, Colston, the kid from Hofstra, where I live in Long Island. They play for the Saints, and OBJ Beckham Jr. So 2 of the kids of the 5 now are from LSU. So that's saying something about the LSU football program. But Justin Jefferson has great ball skills, great awareness. Of course, he can run. He locates the ball extremely well. He catches the ball at its highest point. He's dropped a few balls, but he hasn't dropped a bunch of balls. But he's done an extremely great job of tracking the ball. And just remember, going back to Kirk Cousins, I said last year on my podcast, the one thing that Kirk Cousins does really well is throw a deep ball. He throws a nice deep ball. So having a guy like Jefferson and a guy like Cousins and a running back like Cook, you're not even talking about Thielen, and you're not even talking about the tight ends. I like
know.
the tight ends. So the Vikings are loaded with weapons on offense, and Justin Jefferson just happens to be another elite weapon that's been added by the Vikings personnel department. They've done a great job with that selection.
If I can weigh in on Evans, if I can weigh in on Justin Jefferson tonight, he's great. It's wonderful. It's a surprise to some, Joe Johnson.
I know. I knew why you were laughing, man. I could hear it.
Yes, he's been. Everybody came in and thought he was just going to be a slot receiver, and they have a slot receiver in Adam Thielen. How is he going to fit? Blah blah blah. But he's done everything they've asked him for. He's stepped up ahead of pace where he probably should be at this time, and he's great. He's wonderful. He's like the 5th in the league in yardage. 2 yards ahead of Stephon Diggs, as a matter of fact. But he's not Randy Moss. And I don't think he ever can be. They called Randy a freak for a reason, and all you need to do is go back and look at Randy's highlights, and your jaw drops all over again. Even how many years later, the way he just changed the league, and the way he ran past receivers. Jefferson is doing it in his way, as you mentioned, Joe, and he's gonna get there where maybe you can start talking to him. I think it's a little early to allot him with all the Randy Moss comparisons. They're there. You can talk about him, but let's let him be who he is. But in the meantime, I will go back and watch some Randy highlights and just go just up and love it, because it's so much fun to watch Randy play football.
And I think you touched on it.
Well, Randy Moss was a touchdown maker. Jefferson doesn't have quite those types of numbers with the touchdowns. And, the elite Hall of Famers score a lot of touchdowns. So Jefferson is off to a great start, but, we like to see more touchdowns.
Yeah, and I think the litmus test that Joe touched on for Randy, like in the argument of him versus Jerry Rice, is who. The way I boiled it down in this really long article that I wrote over the summer was Jerry Rice was, first of all, obviously he had back-to-back quarterbacks that were Hall of Famers, and Joe Montana and Steve Young, but he also was the beneficiary of, at the time, the West Coast offense being a new system. And the difference with Randy is that the changes in system that he was around for were predicated on how good he was in defenses having to change the way that they covered him. I don't know how much of that is hyperbole or not. I mean, Coach, did you see with Randy teams specifically either drafting players, obviously in the NFC North, or defenses really changing how they covered him in general?
Well, I tell you, you're not going to see the Green Bay Packers put a linebacker out over him outside and play over the top of him with a corner like they did with Randy Moss. You're not going to see that. You're certainly, not going to see teams not get out of cover 2 and just say you're going to have to beat us with the run, i.e. Robert Smith, And you're not going to see that with Justin Jefferson just yet. Randy Moss changed the game and made the Green Bay Packers, and I talk about them because they were in our division and they were our big rival and still are. They started drafting taller cornerbacks, bigger players, and all of that was to find some way to slow down Randy Moss.
Yeah, those were the days. I each week we have to talk about the offensive line. I mean, as I said last week, Joe and I have talked about the offensive line almost every week since we started doing a show together in, I think, 2016, 2017. But I'm looking at the line as it is right now or in the last game with Ezra Cleveland coming back. And if you look at PFF's grades for each player on that line, basically everyone did good to great, except for Dakota Dozier had another game where he had a 30 or under grade, which is like the fourth time I think now that that's happened this season. And I wrote an article a couple weeks ago basically saying they should move either Cleveland to the left side. It's probably too late in the season, but maybe in the offseason, put Brett Jones at the right guard spot because he performed relatively well there. But coach, I mean, why do you think that they're at this point sticking with Dozier, and do you have any like thoughts on his game in particular, or just the idea of maybe flipping Cleveland to the left side since that's the side he played on in college?
Well, you can't do that now with 4 games to go, first of all, and you're kind of entrenched in on the group. Offensive lines tend to get better as the 5 guys play together more in game situations. They know how to pass off stunts. They know what they want to do when they're picking up dogs or blitzes. So, all of a sudden with 4 games to go, making a change, I don't know that would be a good thing. I don't grade the films. I look at the games on Game Pass and all of that. But the offensive line is an area that, when the season ends, continues to be a subject that needs to be addressed. And but they're doing a solid job. Certainly in the run game, they're doing a great job. But I've said this time and time again: if the Vikings had to get into a drop back passing game, they're going to struggle.
Coach, when you were in the war room or even beforehand preparation for a draft, were you, because of where you came from as a tight end line coach and such and a player on the line, were you advocating for linemen because you knew the value of them, or were you just, you had to see the picture as a whole? How did you address situations like that? Because you got to know that everybody has been saying got to address the line, and they all think that the powers that be don't do that with the Vikings. I'm just curious what you went through when you were there.
Well, I've always felt that you build the team from the front to the back, and you have to have and down the middle. So, obviously you have to have a great quarterback, a great center, which we had a couple of Pro Bowl centers when I was with the Vikings, and Christie and Burke. You have to have a great running back, which the Vikings have traditionally had good running backs, if not great. And you have to have good safeties. That's where it all starts. And then you build from there. But you got to have a good front on both sides of the ball. You got to be able to protect that quarterback, and you got to be able to run the football. In order to do that, you have to have a good offensive line. So I don't grade the film every week. I don't know how these guys are grading that. I don't call Rick Dennison and say, what did you get your grade on Dozier and this and that. But I'm sure that, when they do their final grades at the end of the season, they're going to know where they need upgrades and where they don't need upgrades.
That you bring up something real that I've always really wondered, and I've heard Zimmer talk about it a little bit. I think the Vikings were one of the last 2 teams to sign up for Pro Football Focus's like deep dive analytics package. What is your opinion on guys from the outside grading players like PFF, guys that are watching the same film on Game Pass or All 22 that you and I and Joe can watch or do watch. I've always this is probably really naive and it'll expose my knowledge or lack thereof, but it just seems to me, especially maybe on the defensive side of the ball, to know each play, what the play call is, what the guy's supposed to do, so on and so forth, and then generating a grade from it. It just seems like they might be, I don't know. There just seems like there's so much unknown if you're not part of the team and not part of that process to really assign a grade that might be kind of right, but not dead on, because a lot. I know I bring up PFF. I've done it twice on 2 shows, but I think a lot of people look at that as like the gold standard of this is the objective truth as to what this guy does. And I don't know. I want from your perspective, how much you kind of believe in those analytical programs from outsiders.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of some of these stats. I have other stats that I think matter more. I think looking at the film is a good thing, and you could tell pretty easily whether a guy had a good game or not. I don't think Pro Football Focus is able to grade a guy exactly how a coach grades a guy. He doesn't know if the lineman was supposed to work with the adjacent lineman. They don't know if the back was supposed to pick up the linebacker or the center was supposed to pick up the linebacker. They don't know if the defensive lineman ran the game correctly when they ran a stunt. So they don't know all of this. They might think they do, but they really don't. They don't know the intricacies of the coaching staff and what they're trying to ask, what they're asking the players to do technique-wise. So I think it's a good, a general overall feeling and grade of a player, but I don't think they can be totally accurate, in my opinion.
There goes all our listeners, Joe. You can just hear the knobs being turned off. Young people all over the country that love those analytics.
Well,
there's that sponsorship.
My son Nathan has a very successful podcast on The Athletic, and I think he's got like over 25,000 listeners a week or something, and he is a huge PFF. He's a huge PFF guy. So there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's for all you all you young kids that like numbers and like stats and all of that. And you look at that, and you look at those next gen stats and all of that. The next gen stats I quite honestly don't look at all, in my opinion. I'd rather know, is a team turning the ball over or not turning the ball over.
That's the core, right? I mean, that has to be the most important individual.
Always has been, and always will be. The top 5 teams going into last week, week 13, in the turnover differential, their records combined were 45-10.
Wow.
So,
and then the Vikings.
Give me another stat that means more than that, and then I'll change my 35-year belief.
The Vikings in the past 2 weeks have survived defensive touchdowns. One of them had 2 in the game. So there's the exception that proves the rule for Mike Tice anyway.
To put a pin in,
the thing about the turnovers, if you turn the ball over and it's a pick 6, you have to negate that by coming back the next drive and scoring.
Yeah, absolutely. No question.
It's a momentum killer. I want people to, if they enjoy the show and they want in on Coach Tice's really spot on game picks, picking the Washington over Pittsburgh is astounding.
That's amazing. That's a great pick.
Your show's, every Saturday. It's called Odds and Ends with Mike Tice. I'm sure people will hear the commercial a couple times during this show. And you pick 5 games, right, each week?
Yeah, I pick 5 games a week, and one of them I make the pick of the week. I try guys not to pick the games like, for example, I haven't picked against the Jets all year. I mean, there's some games out there that I could pick and pad my numbers. I try to pick the games that everybody's really interested. Like last week, the worst pick I made, Titans, Browns, I picked the Titans like everybody else. Okay? So that was a bad pick. I also picked Atlanta to cover over the Saints. They almost did, but they didn't quite. But then I picked the Rams. I picked New England, which I thought in a pick'em. Are you kidding me? New England with Coach Belichick having a chance to get back in the playoff race, 45-0. and I picked the Washington football team, and we're getting 7 points because every time someone talked about a stat, and I talked about a stat for the Steelers defense and said the Steelers are number 2 in this, the Steelers are number 3. Guess who was number 3 and guess who was number 4? The Washington football team. And then you add in 3 games in 12 days. That's tough on the players. And I didn't think it sounded like a really good day for the Steelers based on the football team. The Washington football team was red hot, and the Steelers had to be a tired football team.
That scares me, Coach, because the Vikings are going to go to Tampa Bay to play a Bucs team that's been sitting out for a week. So they're probably going to be rested and ready for the Vikings.
Is the Vikings?
It should be a good game because both teams need this for the playoff race. So this should be a pretty good game. I was surprised that the spread was 6.5.
Me too.
And the Vikings were so I think it's a good game to take the points.
Yeah, it's a little surprising. I mean, again, I think there's people in the betting world see some of these narratives with the Vikings and the close games they've had against quote-unquote inferior opponents. And obviously Tampa's lost 3 in a row now. Brady looks not like Brady anymore. He's had a lot more interceptions over the last 3-4 games than he's had in his career, or really at the start of the season. But they're still a really dangerous team, and I think this is a must-win game for the Vikings again, because if they go 3-1, they have a 90% chance of getting in, and they're going to have to go to New Orleans, play the Saints, probably when Breeze comes back, so that'll be very difficult. But what are your overall thoughts on the game, Joe? First, do you agree with me that it's a must-win game, and how tough of an opponent do you really think Tampa is?
Well, I said last week that their margin of error is non-existent. They have to. Would love to see them win out, and then because they do have their own destiny in their hands, they get in. But I think if I look at the rest of the season, I would say this is the one I would think they would drop. You can't see the Brady-led Bucs lose 4 in a row. You can't see the Vikings with their middle linebacker, their best defensive player, possibly not playing. He didn't practice today, and they've got a huge amount of receivers down there with Mike Evans and Gronk and whoever else that Brady's got to throw the ball to. I just think, and a really
Antonio
pretty good
Brown.
defense. Yes, that's the other guy. A pretty good defense. So I think this is the one that they lose, and they can maybe afford one if the Cardinals keep losing, but you really don't want to. You need to win the game that's in front of you, and hopefully they do. But I'm not seeing it this week.
Ooh, that's saying a lot from you, because
yes, it is.
99% of the time when we do our game score predictions, you pick the Vikings, and you've been right more often than I have. What do you think, Coach?
Well, I agree with Joe that 3-1 they're going to be locked to get in. Boy, with the Saints on Christmas on a Friday game with 5 days rest, coming out of probably going to be a tough Bears game because they do have an elite defense, so that's going to be a physical matchup. This is a very important game for the Vikings. I don't see it as a must-win, but I certainly see it as I'd rather win this game than have to count on going to New Orleans on
Great
Christmas
point.
with 5 days rest and winning that game.
That's a good
And
point.
that one would probably be a must game if they don't win this one against Tampa.
Yeah, it's a big one. There's just really, from a stress perspective, there's no rest for the fans or for the players. Like you said, Joe, the margin of error is very, very tight. And like you said, Coach, when it comes to the ugly wins or whatever, when you look back, obviously you're gonna remember that as a win more so than anything else. Because I'd keep looking back at the Seahawks game, and had they converted on that 4th and short, that game would have been over. Or maybe if they kicked a field goal, so on and so forth. I think they lost to the Titans by 1 point, and they were leading by 11 in the third. It's just really, I'm aging horribly watching these games. It's so stressful.
Well, that's the NFL every year. There's always 2 or 3 games that you wish would have went the other way, and that's for every team. Obviously, not for the Chiefs right now, but I'm sure the Chiefs are thankful that they've won a couple of ugly games lately, and that's the NFL though. That's each and every year. That's the NFL.
What concerns me is their Bucs are pretty good defense against the rush, so that kind of neutralizes Cook a little bit. And if Mike Glennon can score 24 points against you, or have a team that does, arrested Brady, no matter how old he is going to put up some points as well. So
he always seems to get it together at this point, right? I mean, the last everyone's been waiting to announce his downfall. They've been doing it for 5 years straight, seemingly, and he always seems to rally late in the season because he knows how important it is. And they still have a really high probability of making the playoffs, regardless. And so they're going to be a tough team. But the NFC, I mean, if they can beat the Bucs and compete against the Saints, they beat the Packers pretty handily. They almost beat the Seahawks. I think the postseason could be wide open. For the Vikings. But yeah, I want to remind people to check out Odds and Ends with Mike Tice every Saturday. We post it on VikingsTerritory.com and PurplePTSD.com, so you can check that out. Or you can find it on Twitter at Mike Tice86, or just Google Odds and Ends with Mike Tice and you'll find it. Coach, thank you so much yet again for joining us and shedding some light on everything for us. We appreciate it, man.
Safe travels back to the West Coast too, Mike.
All right, boys. I appreciate it. We'll talk next week, huh?
Sounds good.
You bet.
Looking forward to it.
All right, man. Thanks. Skol.
Skol. A couple of news items I wanted to get into, Joe. I always look at the Vikings moves kind of I get puzzled by some of the things that they do. Releasing Pat Elflein, for example, or even Alex Boone.
I forgot they did that.
Yeah, it just feels like whenever they get some semblance of depth at some positions, they get rid of it. And looking at Holton Hill's situation, I have a strong feeling that if they randomly released him from the IR, which that doesn't take up a roster spot, they did sign a guy, but he was signed to the practice squad when they sent out the press release announcing he was released, and then they added this guy to the practice squad who I don't remember. It seemed like a strange move to do that on a Wednesday when he's on the IR. You know what I mean? Like there was no point
Agreed.
to it. It almost feels as if maybe something that won't make the news happened. Because he was suspended last season for the first four games, then he got suspended for another 4 games directly after that. He's had all sorts of problems coming out of college. That's why he was an undrafted free agent, even though he's incredibly talented. And so I don't knock them for doing it, but it also makes you feel like they are pretty thin at corners still, and that's really what I'm afraid of going into the playoffs.
The only thing that I can think about it, and I wish we would have asked Mike this because he's probably had to sit in on some of these decisions, maybe not like they do it with this regime, but I'm curious what his thoughts were. But the only thing I can do with figures it saves him money. Mike Zimmer did say today that, or it was yesterday, or something talking about it, that it says this injury, it lingered on more than they thought it would. And maybe they realize, okay, we're not going to get anything back for him. Maybe we're going to need to free up some cash to sign other players as we go forward. Where maybe we're not going to get him back, and so they just let him go, because I think you're still paid when you're on the IR, and I don't know if I suspect it takes your cap space as well. You still got to pay that guy, and if they get rid of him, maybe they save some money. I'm not sure, but that's the only way it makes sense to me. I don't understand it either. To me, that would be a depth that you can keep, holstered for a while and have in your back pocket in case another cornerback gets hurt. So I agree with you. It's a head scratcher to me, and I'm not sure how it works out. Maybe you can point to, as you put on the agenda, Dantzler emerging, and he did play really well last week. I don't think he's totally there yet, but he's getting it. And they have been relying on him when he's not hurt for different parts of the season. So I'm sure they like what they see. But if maybe they thought like Ngakoue, they knew they couldn't get him back next year at a good price, so let's let him go now and see what we can get for him. in the same case, they're going to move on from Holton Hill next year. They see maybe Gladney and Dantzler as their cornerbacks of the future. So, I'm not sure exactly. I'd like to hear them talk about it a little bit more than they have.
And you know how my brain works probably better than anybody. I mean,
Oh my!
I should bill you, or you should send me billable hours through my health insurance. Yes, I can always find the negative in a positive. I've said this a million times on our old show Morning Joes, that when they go on a winning streak, the first thing I think is like I said on the show a couple minutes ago, man, that Seattle game would have been nice.
Yes.
Our record would have been this thin. But when I look at this season, how different would you feel right now had they kept Ngakoue and then signed Snacks Harrison, that gigantic monster nose tackle, for a veteran minimum, because Seattle got him for that on their practice squad, and he does play for them now. He's not on the practice squad anymore, but they're still 30th, 31st against the run on defense. It would have felt. I'd have so much more confidence if the defensive line was shored up that way. And I don't want to take anything away from what those guys are doing. They basically put a 3-tech at the nose tackle position at the last minute because Michael Pierce opted out, and then PJ Hall didn't pass his physical. I just feel like, man.
Well,
man.
I don't know enough about Snacks Harrison or how he's doing to fully answer that question, but I gotta believe while they're working this year as hard as they can to make the playoffs, certainly they aren't thinking about Super Bowl per se, but maybe in the back of their heads they're human like everybody else. But they also got to think to next year, and they're going to get Pierce is his name back, the guy that opted out from the defensive line, and they've got some people there that have been playing okay. They're going to get the Daniil Hunter back, hopefully from his neck surgery, and they got to position themselves on how to build that place next year. And so maybe rent a snack is not the way to go. They've already rented an Ngakoue and see what it got them. So maybe that comes into play there. I don't know, but I would sure like to see more pressure on the quarterback. McGlennon, they'd have killed the Jaguars last week if they'd have got some pressure on the quarterback. They had none, and this week, with Brady who hits the ball out so quickly, they're not even going to make him nervous back there. So that's one reason why I think they're going to beat the Vikings, and I don't think it'll be bad, but I think the Vikings are going to have a tough week, because if Brady can deal back there with our still young and getting better secondary, he's going to be able to make hay with what he wants to do. And I never said this in the last section, but I'll say it now. I got him at 31-24, Bucs winning the game. I don't know about you. You better pick up something good, because you're down by 38 points now.
I know. Last week was not great. I went for it though, and I'm proud of myself for doing it. I don't know. This is the hardest season to really predict what's going to happen, because you don't know what team is going to show up. I feel like there is some truth to the fact that they play up or down to the competition. I feel like for whatever reason they've been much more conservative these last couple weeks, probably because they felt like these teams were inferior to them from a skill perspective, so they didn't need to do the dialed up exotic mixed coverages, pre-snap, post-snap, blitz type stuff that was really successful for them coming out of the bye. Kirby, our editor, texted me when it went to overtime in all caps, why the bleep does Zimmer always default back to being so conservative? I think that also extends to the offense. It took 37 minutes for them to throw a pass over 20 or 30 yards. Why didn't they go deep earlier? I don't know. It's just things like that. So I think they will put the pedal to the metal in this game, because I think they do realize what we talked about, that for them to feel, control their destiny, they need to win this game. I think a lot of people, myself included, might be overlooking those two divisional games too. Like Coach Tice said, the Chicago. Granted, it's here.
Oh yeah.
Luckily, it's here, and they're falling apart. But you never know in a divisional game. You just don't. They're it's the teams are too familiar with one another. So that having been said, I'm going to go with the Vikings winning this game. Not just because I want to make up on points, but because I want to believe that they'll do it. I to be honest with you, I don't think they're really going to, but I think it'll be close. They just can't get down early like they have been. These late game rallies have been great and stress free, but they really need to in all 4 quarters play at a high, consistent level in all facets
Oh
of the game.
yes.
What concerns me is what we keep talking about, right? All these mistakes, like the special teams, yet again found different ways. They cut their long snapper. Punt returns have been bad. Then all of a sudden, Dan Bailey got a club foot. I don't know. Like, it's just, how does this keep happening? Why is it like a different guy each week screws
Well,
up?
I think Dan Bailey had a bad game, and I think he'll be back this week. But I did read a stat this morning that the Vikings are seventh in the league from PFF on coverage. So it's
Hey,
not terrible.
that's not too
You
bad.
know,
Outside of that
no,
Patterson thing. So
right.
I'm gonna go with the Vikings, and I'm gonna say it'll be 34-31, and I'll give it to Bailey with the game-winning field goal with time expiring. Side note: if they had hit that 62-yard field goal, I would have the sites would have been sold on Craigslist to lowest bidder. You can have them. I can't do this anymore. My fiance, as I've mentioned, was a Packers fan, and she's trying to convert to being a Vikings fan. And each week, the last handful of weeks, at the end of the game, she'll be like, she literally looks at me and it's like, I can't do this. I don't get why you. What do you? This is so stressful. What do you get out of this? Like, and I'm like, don't you see the hook though? That's how they hook you, because it's the
It's fun.
emotion, and
Yeah.
it feels good when they win in those close situations, right? I mean, it's like an endorphin rush, and you get to watch highlights and celebrate and so on and so forth. And so I think there's a little bit of that going on. But no, I think they'll play better this week, and hopefully they'll be able to eke out the win. Yeah, 34-31 is what I'm going with. I want to remind everybody, if they like our show or want to check out our sites, we honestly, last month and a half, we've been posting over almost 10 articles a day between the two sites. PurplePTSD.com started in 2015. I bought Vikings Territory in 2017 because I was like, you can't beat them, join them situation. Each site is separate with separate teams and separate content. So you're going to want to, I don't know if I'm old. Do people bookmark things anymore? Who knows? You're going to want to check out both each day. And then head over to miniice.com as we just started working with Seth uh, Topol, I thought it was Tupel, from KLGR Radio in Redwood Falls, where I do a segment with him each week for about an hour. And Jake Jensen, who formerly worked for The Athletic, writing about the NHL, are running that site with our backing. And they have a great team of guys that are going to start really writing. I saw the first article actually this morning, so check that out. It's a little bit of a work in progress. It might change a little bit. The colors might change. The logo might change, but you'll get the content that you want. But I wanted to thank you, Joe, for hopping on the show yet again this week.
You bet.
It was a doozy. I really hope that we have another win next week, because this has been, I think the only, what was it, 3 or 4? No, I think it was 4 teams. No, 3 teams have started 1-5 and made the playoffs since the merger in 1970. And the first one was in 1970. I think it was the Bengals, and then the other 2 were in the last 5 years, the Chiefs and the Indianapolis Colts. And so it's a year of records. Justin Jefferson broke that record, the 1,000 yards in
Yep.
12 games, and now this. It's been. I mean, it's stressful, but it's been really, really fun. So I hope everyone
If
enjoys
yeah,
the show and wants to keep on
if
celebrating.
if Cook can run the ball the next 2 weeks, he'll certainly be able to the last 2. So, and they could make the playoffs and really change the whole look of this year after a 1-5 start to making the playoffs. It'd be quite something. It'd be a lot of fun
This is
playing with
me.
house money.
That's me knocking on wood, because I feel that there was some on Twitter, some after the Jags game, people were disconcerted by Dalvin's fumbles and his health, essentially. And in the last couple weeks, his average yards per carry have dropped 1.5 to 2 yards. He's in the 3s now. He was in the 5s before. Um, they gave him the ball 41 times on Sunday, and I know he got mad when last week, and we talked about this when a reporter asked him on a conference call about wearing down, and he said, "Well, you wouldn't ask Derrick Henry that question." And I wrote an article saying, and I mentioned this last week, of course we wouldn't ask him that because he hasn't gotten injured. He's missed 2 games in his career individually. You've missed 40% of the games that you were available. You've been hurt. We saw it last season. He looked great, and then at the end of the season, he had that AC joint injury, and he just really wasn't the same in the playoffs. And so I really just want to. I know that you have to play the hot hand and the offense runs through him first. It sets everything up with the play action and all of that. But he is amassing an incredible amount of touches. And I just hope that we don't end up in the same scenario as last season where
he told Mark Craig today that he says he's ready for 38, 40, 44, whatever they got for me. He says, I feel fine.
wow.
So
I hope so.
He said it before anybody asked. So he's ready to go.
And they'll have Alexander Madison back, I think, this week, which will help. They didn't really have anybody
No
else.
way. He had an appendectomy, didn't he?
Oh, you're right. I thought you could just bounce back from that for some reason.
Oh, no. That's major surgery.
I suppose.
We'll have Mike Boone back there, Amir Abdullah. And
I love Abdullah. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, well, he's a Big Ten guy, right? Just
Yeah.
like Justin Jefferson isn't.
I saw your comment.
Had to be said. Had to be said.
I saw. I was gonna respond, but then I got caught up in all of the death threats I was getting from people from Philadelphia. That a broken clock is right twice a day. So there's exceptions to every rule. But yeah, no, I actually put this on the agenda, so I should end the show with it. But I am going to be eating crow forever on the Justin Jefferson thing because. Not to defend the take, but there's 2 components to why I was angry about this pick. The first one was that Spielman has been pretty awful in regards to drafting wide receivers in the first or second round since he got here. Vikings really haven't had a success in the first round outside of maybe Percy Harvin since Moss left, and that predates Spielman. But as a triangle of authority, even you can throw in guys that none of them made it past their rookie contract with this team. And so I saw that. I saw the slot thing with 99.6% of the passes coming from the slot. And then I also, as a guy who doesn't watch college football like I watch the Vikings, we did like a 5-hour live show reacting to that take, and both of our draft experts and then other people all essentially said that Jefferson was a reach at 22, that he was a second-tier receiver who the Vikings could have maybe traded down and got a couple picks later. Granted, you saw the reaction when Philly took Rieger, and there's no way that was going to happen. Clearly, they knew more about it than I did, and they're insanely right about it. But it just seemed like everybody hated the pick, and then all of a sudden they didn't, and then I was the only one basically saying what everyone said initially, and we were all wrong. I mean, the guy's
I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it, and the only thing it's easy to say now, but I did not because I have to take the opposite side of you on all issues. But what I will say is the crow that you're going to eat will be tasty because you can watch him scoring touchdowns.
Hey, I'll eat it. It'll be my Thanksgiving, my stuffed bird. And again, we got a tremendous response to the first show, and so I wanted to thank everybody at KDLM Radio and the people in Detroit Lakes and up near Fargo for tuning into the show. You can follow me on Twitter at VTPTSD, like Vikings Territory PTSD, and you can follow Joe on Twitter as well at Joe Oberle. But we will be back next week, and hopefully we'll have more fun and quasi-positive things that I can spin into negative things to discuss. Skol!